Welcome to the Refurbishment Mastery podcast with me, Martin Rapley. If you're a property investor who is worried about paying too much for your next property, concerned that you don't know how to manage a refurb, or scared that you will be ripped off by a builder, then this is for you. In this podcast, I share over 30 years of experience of managing refurbishments and conversions to help you make more profit, save your time, and ultimately enjoy the process. On with the podcast. Welcome to this week's podcast, in which I'm going to answer some shorter, smaller questions that have been raised by members of my community over the last few months. I meet with my community for 90 minutes once a week, where members can raise any question relating to refurbishments, conversions, developments. Sometimes those are projects that are actually in progress at the time. Other members are looking for opportunities and making sure that they're understanding their projects correctly. And other members are closing projects off and dealing with builders and things like that. So these questions are relatively short ones, and I'll cover off a few in this episode. So the first question is, I'm having a buy-to-let refurbished at the moment, and the downstairs flooring needs replacing. It's currently carpeted. The proposal is to use vinyl tile. Is it worth having a damp-proof membrane installed at the same time? Are there any drawbacks with a damp-proof membrane lying beneath the vinyl tiles? Current EPC rating of the property is a D. The two-bedroom house was constructed in 1982 and has not had any significant damp issues to date. Property is not in a flood area. I'll be grateful for your advice and opinion. So there we go. A fairly typical kind of question from a member of my community who would have had the answer to this question a number of weeks ago, of course, but I'm sharing here for any of you that are perhaps seeing the same kind of properties and thinking the same kind of thing. So there's a couple of points in here to flag up. And the first one is that a member here has actually said that the current EPC rating of the property is a D. And I just want to point out here that damp-proof membranes are not going to have any effect on the EPC, plus or minus, because the EPC is all relating to fuel efficiency and how efficient our properties are, as far as how much energy they need to heat the properties and how much energy is lost through poorly insulated walls and roofs and things like that. There's no connection with damp and damp membranes particularly, so we can close that one off. Now, the second thing I can pick up here is that this property was constructed in 1982. Now, generally, properties constructed at that time, and generally properties constructed since the Second World War, really, are going to be built with a reasonable, and of course the more recent it is, the better the quality, but they're going to be built with a reasonable damp membrane included in the construction. There are properties pre the Second World War that have also got good damp membranes, but if we take that as a really easy point to pick up, properties built from the late 40s into the 50s, you shouldn't have any real problems with damp. There will be isolated cases where there are properties with some problems, but by and large, you shouldn't. Certainly a property built in 1982 is going to be built to a reasonable standard. I can't remember exactly when the building regulations came in, but we were certainly starting to build to reasonable standards in 1982, and there should be a damp membrane. So the comment is there's no evidence of any significant damp. We've got a property from 1982 which we wouldn't expect predominantly to have problems with damp. Certainly damp coming up through the ground floor slab. And then the next thing is about laying some kind of damp membrane beneath vinyl tiles. Well, there's no real way of that I'm aware of that there's no real products that you could lay on the floor and then literally lay a lay vinyl tiles on top. A damp proof membrane typically nowadays would be nothing more than a nice, thick, robust plastic sheet. And of course, if we laid a plastic sheet on top of our existing floor, the whole lot's just going to wobble around. It works when we build a new property because it's sandwiched between multiple layers and can't move anywhere. In fact, it's also turned up the wall and finished off into the brickwork. So it's all kind of held in nice and rigid. And then we would lay concrete on top normally to hold the whole thing in place. So I'm not aware of any kind of membrane that we could lay on top of our existing floor slab. If we did have rising damp, so let's assuming that for whatever reason the construction has failed, so we've got some rising damp. I don't think there's any membrane we could lay on top there. In the old days, we might have painted a bitumen layer over the top of the existing slab, but they're not really totally waterproof, as we can see now, where you're probably seeing properties on the market where basements have been painted with a bitumen and they're still letting damp in. Bitumen's really a temporary type product. It probably lasts 5 years or so, but possibly not too much more than that. So as a result, you could put something on there, but it's only going to kick the can down the road. And even then, I wouldn't have said it's going to be particularly effective. So, the answer to this question really is I don't think you need to be laying anything before laying your vinyl down from a damp proof membrane perspective, unless you've got damp coming through the floor. Now, if you've got damp coming through the floor, you can't solve that without, I believe, actually breaking up the floor itself. So if you've got a rising damp problem, you really would be advised to bring in a consultant or bring in a specialist that can give you better knowledge as to what the cause of the problem is and what the remedy might be. And I would think it's likely that if you've got damp coming through the floor of a 1980s type property, there is some kind of more fundamental defect. And the remedy would be to break up the floor, dig down a bit, lay the membrane, and then build the floor back up to the right level again, rather than some kind of retro repair, because I'm not really aware of any kind of retro repair that would have any kind of benefit. But as the question here seems to suggest, there's no issues. Um, I wouldn't be worried about it. There's no issues today. We've got a 1980s type property where we wouldn't predominantly expect issues. There's no real easy way of laying a damp membrane just in case. It's not going to have any benefit to the EPC. So my thoughts would be take up the carpet. The only thing your flooring contractor will suggest is laid would be what we'd call a latex screed. Now, a latex screed goes down very, very thin, normally only a couple of millimeters, although in some areas it might just need to be a little bit thicker just to take up the levels. It's a very thin, watery product that is pretty much poured over the existing slab. It fills up all of the tiny pores that are likely to be in a concrete or a screeded slab. Gets rid of any undulations because it kind of self levels. It kind of flows to a level surface. And when it's finished, it is super smooth, which means that you can lay vinyl on top of it and eliminate any little divots, any ridges or anything like that. So you will be recommended to lay that and take that recommendation. Vinyl doesn't really stick particularly well to other products anyway. So take that recommendation, but that won't have any damp protection elements within it. So there we go. That's the first question, which actually, to some extent, leads me in to the second question. So the second question is talks about, among other things, so they're talking about a project that they're thinking of carrying out. Among other things, we plan on converting the garage into a bedroom and a bathroom. Um, so here we go. I would say converting a garage, an integral garage, is actually quite a good project for anyone who's relatively new to refurbishments. If you're being cautious and you don't want to bite off anything too major, I would suggest that a garage conversion is a good little scheme to consider. So the question goes on, how can we determine if the garage floor has a damp membrane underneath without digging it up? The floor level appears to be about a brick and a half bit lower than the house. So this is quite a common detail. And you've possibly even been in some properties where you can see that people have converted the garage in the past, and there are steps down into that room because they were at a lower level. Now, the likelihood is that beneath the answer to the question is that below that garage slab, the likelihood is that there is a damp membrane. So that because we wouldn't have wanted dampness coming up into our garage when when it was used as a garage with a car in it. And the likelihood is, because the damp membrane is not an expensive element, the likelihood is that they have laid the damp membrane over the whole slab or the whole part of the construction, and then they've laid a concrete slab on top of that. And it's that concrete slab that the is in the bottom of the garage and the car is parked on at the moment. So that's the likelihood, although to some extent it doesn't really matter whether there is a damp membrane there or not, because the reason that you've got a difference in height between the remainder of the house and the garage is because the remainder of the house has got some kind of insulation in that built up floor. So if you were to sit on the floor in the garage or stand on the floor in the garage with bare feet, you would feel that that floor is considerably colder than the floor in, say, the living room or the kitchen, because it hasn't got that insulation there. And in the winter, you would feel a marked difference between the two temperatures. So when you convert a garage into a habitable space, we need to ensure that we bring the garage construction up to the standard for a residential space, which is going to have to include some insulation. So the fact that you need to go down a step or two to get into the garage at the moment is actually really, really good, because it means that we can lay the insulation on that slab that's there at the moment. We can then put a top coat on it, which may be concrete, but quite a lot of the time we would just do that in timber. And that it now brings us up level with the remainder of the house so that we haven't got to step up or step down into our garage. And as good practice, because we're not always 100% sure what's going on underneath, as good practice, your architect will design a damp membrane to lay on that existing slab. So clean off the existing slab, lay the thick polythene sheet, turn it up the wall a little bit, probably dress it into the wall. So cut out a little slot around the perimeter and dress it into the wall. Then the insulation will be laid on the top of that. And then possibly, and this is the normal design, we would lay timber on top of that. So the answer to the question is there probably is insulation. There probably is a damp membrane underneath the garage floor, but in reality, it's not super relevant whether it is or it's not, because the good design would be to lay another one. And the significant thing when converting a garage is that we need to insulate the floor to ensure that we are compliant with the building regulations. By the way, we also have to insulate, or we're likely to have to insulate the walls, and we may well need to insulate the ceiling as well. So we are taking a space that is not a habitable room and converting it into a habitable room. We need to comply with the building regulations that are relevant as of today, as far as making it a habitable space. Not even the building regulations that were relevant at the time the house was built, it's the building regulations today. And to do this project, the only way you're going to get that right is to appoint an architect or a technician who can who can draw up the building regulation drawings. So these are the drawings that your builders are going to need. That effectively they are the instructions how to convert this garage into a habitable space. Now, to be fair to builders, they generally know this stuff. It's relatively straightforward, but you need to have the drawings because building control need to see that there is a plan, and it's those drawings that they're going to come and effectively sign off the design to say that the design is accurate, and then they're going to check that your builder is following that design, and ultimately they're looking after your interests in the longer term. So then you don't need to worry too much about the detail here, because that will be dealt with by someone with the right skills that understands what you've got and what you actually need in the longer term, and they'll put all of that into the drawings that they're preparing for you. So that's the second question. I'm going to do I'll do a couple more questions. Next one, totally different subject. In retrofitting fire doors to an existing HMO, one contractor is saying because of the non-standard door sizes, he should quote for fitting new frames. Is it a solution to say order bespoke size doors, fit them, and then only if there's a problem with the old frame, incur the cost of fitting a new frame as well, as the cost of making good around the frame could be quite high? So this is a really it's a good question, of course, but it's also a question that allows me just to go into a little bit more depth and add a little bit more awareness and clarity to help listeners understand that fitting a fire door is not always a simple solution in older properties. And that's because some older properties have got what we would consider, and what's flagged up here, non-standard door sizes. Now, if you've got a fairly typical older property, and I'm thinking Victorian type terrace properties where there were a lot built at the same time, they're all part of a little development. Just jumping in to make sure that you've got everything you need. Now, in a number of these podcasts, you'll have heard me talk about other property investors that I'm currently working with or have worked with in the past. And so I wanted to ensure that you can find out how you can actually work with me. And the best place to start with that is my website, www.refurbishmentmastery.com. On there, you'll find details of training courses that I run. You'll find details about my community, and also how you can work with me on a one-to-one basis when you are progressed far enough down the line. And then if you're not really sure what's right for you and how we can work together, then there's a button at the top. Just hit the button at the top that says book a call. It's absolutely free. It will take you to my diary, find a slot, and we'll be able to talk in the next couple of weeks. Remember, the website is refurbishmentmastery.com. I really look forward to helping you with a successful delivery of all of your projects. Now back to the podcast. the likelihood is in there, or there is less likelihood of non-standard door sizes. And if you ever go to a door manufacturer or a door supplier, what you'll find is a lot of them will actually quote an imperial range and a metric range. And the metric range are what we're predominantly using now. Uh, but the imperial range will fit a lot of our older properties where the doors were slightly different sizes. And if you look at the metric ranges, you'll often find that the metric ranges have actually got some very odd dimensions. And the reason for those odd dimensions is that they have been aligned with what were considered standard sizes back pre-metrification, but even further and further back than that. And you'll find these standard sizes in properties way back in early 1900s, even into the 1800s. So if you've got a fairly typical property for your area, you will quite often find that the doors are a standard size. The biggest challenge is that there's been some movement and some of the frames are not quite they've tilted a little bit. So they're not quite rectangular anymore. They're slightly off rectangle. And that is more likely to be your problem in those buildings. And so that could be another reason that you can't get standard off-the-shelf doors to fit. They might have done in the past, but they won't now. And you shouldn't really be carrying out major alterations to a fire door. You can plane a little bit off a fire door, but not too much, because you start to damage the fire integrity. So in those cases, contractors will also recommend replacing the frames, although they may be able to do some modification to some of the frames to make them actually work. Now, if you start getting towards grander type properties, and there's no real definition better than that, you will start to find non-standard door sizes, or perhaps door sizes that were standard at the time but aren't readily available nowadays. And I myself have got one of these properties where the doors are a non-standard size. And in fact, I've had a previous property as well back in the past. So they're definitely out there. They're the typical definition, I would say, is these grander type properties. Quite often, you'll find a lot around the 1920s time, and I would say both properties where I've had them in the past would be 1920s type properties. Often where they were a little bit grander, and they would use slightly larger doors that were effectively made to suit at the time. And those are the ones that you are going to struggle to find replacements for. So, and in those cases, and to answer the question here, is there a solution to make up bespoke doors? So the answer to that is you've got two solutions. One is you go to a joinery shop and you get doors made up to suit the openings you've got. The challenge with that is the joinery shop can't certify that it's a fire door because that style and size hasn't been certified as a fire door. Now, sometimes if it's built to certain details, building control will accept that it's a fire door. But in other cases, you actually have to send a door away to be tested. And effectively, to do that, that has to be set on fire under control in a controlled environment, and that then verifies that it acts as a fire door. I've certainly had to do that in the past, not in a residential situation. Actually, it was for a museum. We needed to replace a pair of doors that were about 4 meters high and about 2.5 meters, maybe 3 meters wide or so. Enormous doors. And the only way we could verify that the doors that we were putting in there were fire doors was to make up an identical set, send them away for testing. Of course, that was a cost that the client bore. It was a museum. They had to consider the safety of their visitors. and their staff. So of course they had to spend this money. And a pair of doors that I think at the time, this was a long time ago, were costing somewhere in the region of £7,000 or £8,000, effectively cost more than double that to include the testing. We don't want to be getting involved with that in our residential properties. So you may be able to get approval from building control for bespoke doors. The problem is bespoke doors are expensive. I haven't bought a bespoke door for a long, long time. Again, I've done it in my past career, but not done it for a long, long time. You could easily be talking about £1,000 a door, which of course is astronomically expensive in upgrading a property for an HMO use. So the other option we have got is we can buy what are called door blanks. Now, door blanks, you buy them from a timber merchant, from a door supplier. They are effectively a board that has been certified as a product as being fire resistant, 30 minutes fire resistant. And we cut that to the right size, and then we re-lip it with a trim around the perimeter so that we haven't got the raw edges on the outside. And those are relatively cheap to buy. It's relatively cheap to make up a fire door in this way. The downside is they've got no feature on them. They are just flat doors. And you, as a result, you've got, if you want some feature, you've got to plant feature on. And that starts to add the cost up again, which is why most builders will say the easiest thing to do is to take out the existing doors and frames, put in new doors and frames to a standard size, that which would normally be just a little bit smaller. You wouldn't want to go bigger because that would mean you'd have to make your openings bigger. So you'd make them a little bit smaller. You would infill the gap with timber between the frame and the existing wall, and then of course your architrave, the detail that goes around the door and frame, would cover up the gap, and we've got a finished door. No one would know afterwards that you'd put a standard size door in. So that's why builders are generally recommending replacing doors and frames, because anything else is really either disproportionately expensive or not often quite as neat. One thing I would just say, just to finish this off, is you will find non-standard doors for sale in salvage merchants and eBay. And certainly one of my properties where I had non-standard doors and we had to replace a door for, I can't remember why. I think the door itself was so twisted we couldn't straighten it up. We actually found something that was very, very similar to the remainder of the house on eBay. And actually, what we did was we took a door from elsewhere in the property and put it that matched and put it where the twisted one was. And we put this one that was very nearly the same but slightly different in a location where it didn't show, i.e., there wasn't another door of a similar next to it. That particular property has got a mixture of doors in it where other people in the past have played around with it. It doesn't really show, but that's because the layout. Yeah, there's rooms where you can't really see two doors at the same point. So we did have a little bit of flexibility in solving that. So do have a look on in salvage merchants and in on eBay and places like that. You may find what you need in those locations. But if you want a quick, easy, simple thing, unfortunately, it is take the existing doors and frames out and replace them with new doors and frames. Final question for this little session. Very different topic now. So we're talking about JCT forms of contract. I have found a builder to do conversion work for me, and I'm in talks with my broker to arrange terms of financing. Will I need to draw out a JCT contract between me and the builder separately, or will the lender also want to have a say on the terms? Can I call upon a quantity surveyor to assist me with this, or is it best to find a solicitor? So, a really good question here, and something that I know a lot of investors actually overlook and sadly actually get wrong, which it isn't always a problem, but could become a problem if you need to rely on the terms of the JCT, if you need to invoke the JCT and effectively take a legal approach to something. If you are borrowing funds from a commercial entity, so banks, building societies, commercial lenders, you are almost certainly going to be asked to put in place between you and the builder a JCT form of contract. JCT stands for Joint Contracts Tribunal. They're a body that have been around for a very long time. And they've put together these standard forms of contract. If you want to know more about JCT forms of contract, then have a listen to podcast episode number 26. So, quite an old one there, where I did go into a lot more detail about the JCT forms of contract. But to answer this question, you will need to put together a contract between you and your builder. Now, um, the reason your lender is asking for a JCT form is because it is a standard, trusted, tested form of contract, i.e., we are less likely to have dispute because both parties should know a little bit more about it, particularly builders will know more about it. The other massive benefit of a JCT form of contract is you do not need to go to a solicitor to put it together for you. In some cases, you may not even need any expert at all. I'll come back to that shortly. The idea with these standard contracts is that they can be put together by a competent person rather than a solicitor. And that competent person is going to be cheaper than a solicitor. And that competent person is potentially even going to be more aware of how to use a JCT form of contract than a lot of solicitors, because solicitors aren't needed to be doing JCT forms of contract, so they don't very often see them. So the kinds of people that can put together JCT forms of contract for you are going to be consultants within construction. The typical people are quantity surveyors, as noted here, also project managers, and sometimes architects. In the past, architects always did this, but more recently, I'm seeing that architects are not doing JCT forms of contract, which I think is a good thing, really, because architects are really great at getting the best use of your space, getting good value rooms, and getting you the best properties. They often haven't got the detail to sit down and put together formal paperwork and formal documents, because they're good at getting. Yeah, they're much better with visual type things. So there's no disrespect to architects. Putting together contracts would probably bore a lot of architects, whereas quantity surveyors, project managers will be happy with that kind of job. So if you need contracts put together, you are welcome to get in touch with me about that. That's a service that I offer. So although I predominantly do training, I do offer a few other services, and one of those is putting together a JCT form of contract. So please book a call with me, and we can have a chat through the process of that, and I can help you with that if appropriate. I did say there's one situation where you won't need to bring in a separate consultant. On the JCT suite of contracts, there's lots and lots of different contracts in the JCT suite. Most of the time, I would recommend one of two. So if I'm appointed to put together contract documents, I normally am recommending one of two, effectively based on the size of and complexity of your project, the minor works form of contract, or the intermediate works form of contract. You're not likely to need anything grander than that in most cases. But there is another form of contract called the homeowner's form of contract. which to be honest, I've never used because I've never used one for my own contracts. But I have seen it, and it is possible that you and your builder can put together a homeowner's contract between you. The advantage of that is it's written a lot in a simpler way, and of course you're not going to have to pay for an external consultant to put together the additional documents. So it will save you some money in the longer term. So have a look at the JCT homeowners contract, but be aware that if your project is a little bit more complex than perhaps a basic house refurbishment or a basic HMO conversion, the likelihood is that your lender will want a full JCT form of contract with a consultant putting it together. The consultant that puts it together could be a quantity surveyor, project manager, maybe an architect. And in the contract, they are called the contract administrator. And as I say, for more information and more background about all of that, have a listen to podcast number 26. So there we go. 4 quickfire little questions just to sow some seeds and to help you get better understanding as to what you're looking at when you go viewing properties, perhaps, and also how you administer your existing or how you administer your contracts and how you might manage your existing refurbishments, your little conversions and things like that. So a little bit of several different kinds of topics, some of which I really hope you get some great learnings from. If you've got any other questions, always feel free to drop them to me. I'll cover them off in subsequent podcast editions, and you can learn. You can obviously learn from that. Alternatively, look at the details in the show notes. Book a call with me, and let's talk about how you can be on those calls on a weekly basis, getting your questions answered as quickly as weekly, or in some cases, depending on what level you come in at, getting your answers to questions within 24 hours. So there's details in the show notes as to how you can book a call with me, and we'll have a chat and see which is most appropriate, which is the right level for you to come in and join me at. So thanks very much for joining me, and I'll catch up with you very soon in another episode.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. Please do like, share and leave a comment where you can. If you need any guidance or advice with anything to do with your refurbishments or conversions, then don't hesitate to reach out. You can book a free call with me by clicking on the link at the top of my website, refurbishmentmastery.com. There's other ways you can contact me in the show notes as well. I look forward to speaking to you again soon.